The laugh was a splinter of glass in the cathedral-like silence of the room. It was sharp, cruel, and echoed off the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a city Isla could see but never touch. Donovan Cale stood over her, his shadow a suffocating blanket. The crystal glass he'd just thrown had shattered against the marble fireplace, and a single, perfect crimson droplet beaded on her cheek where a shard had grazed her. He hadn't even flinched. He simply admired his work, the way a sociopathic artist might admire a chaotic brushstroke. "You see, my darling," he purred, his voice a deceptive velvet laced with arsenic. "You can cry. You can beg. You can pray to whatever god you think is listening. But no one is coming." He knelt, his expensive suit not even wrinkling, and tilted her chin up with a thumb and forefinger, forcing her to meet his cold, empty eyes. "No one will ever stop me." That laugh again, louder this time, bouncing off the sterile white walls of their gilded cage. He was right, of course. For 2 years, he had proven it. Donovan was more than a man. He was an institution of terror built on a foundation of money and influence. He had isolated her completely, severing ties to her family with expertly crafted lies, monitoring her every digital footprint, and ensuring every person they interacted with was on his payroll and in his pocket. The staff moved through the house like ghosts, their eyes averted, their silence bought and paid for. The sprawling estate on the edge of the city wasn't a home. It was a fortress designed to keep her in, not the world out. Her life was a meticulously curated performance of wifely perfection, punctuated by explosions of his private, unpredictable rage. A misplaced book, a meal that wasn't to his liking, a glance held a second too long with a gardener. Any of it could trigger the monster that lurked just beneath his polished veneer. He never left marks where they would show, a testament to his chilling precision. He broke her spirit in increments, chipping away at her sense of self until she was a hollow reflection of the woman she used to be. Yet, in that hollowed-out space, a tiny, resilient ember refused to be extinguished. It was a memory, insignificant to anyone else, but it had become her secret talisman. 6 months ago, on a rare, supervised trip to a specialty grocer in the city, Donovan's imported sedan had needed gas. As he stood by the pump, his back to her, Isla had watched a pack of motorcycles pull in on the other side. They were Hell's Angels. The patches on their leather vests were stark and unapologetic. They were loud, rough, and utterly, terrifyingly free. One of them, a mountain of a man with a wild, gray-streaked beard, had caught her eye. He wasn't looking at her with pity or judgment. He had simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement, before turning back to his brothers. In that fleeting moment, she hadn't seen criminals or outlaws. She had seen an alternative universe, one where strength wasn't used to dominate, but to exist. The roar of their engines, as they left, had vibrated in her chest, a primal drumbeat of defiance that she had held onto in the suffocating silence of her life ever since. That memory was her only weapon. As Donovan stood up, satisfied with her terror, and walked away to pour himself a drink from the bar, Isla touched the cut on her cheek. The pain was real, grounding. His words echoed. "No one will ever stop me." The ember inside her flickered, and for the first time, a thought that was not of fear, but of rebellion, answered back. Maybe not no one. The auto shop owned by Grizz sat on the last stretch of asphalt before the county road turned to gravel and wound its way up into the hills, where the wealthy built their glass and steel fortresses to look down on the rest of the world. It was a place of organized chaos, smelling perpetually of gasoline, hot metal, and stale coffee. Grizz himself was built like the vintage engine blocks he so lovingly restored, wide, solid, and seemingly impervious to the passage of time. His hands, permanently stained with grease, could diagnose a misfiring Harley by sound alone. He was wiping down a gleaming chrome fender when Donovan Cale's black Mercedes hissed past, a silent, predatory shark in a sea of rumbling American steel. It was the speed that first caught his attention, far too fast for the turn-off, but it was the face in the passenger window that made him pause, chamois cloth held motionless in midair. He saw a woman, her features pale and drawn, her hair a curtain of dark silk. But it was her eyes that snagged in his memory. They were wide, haunted, and for a split second, they seemed to lock onto the gritty reality of his shop as if it were a life raft. He saw something else, too. A deep, ugly purple shadow just at her temple, mostly obscured by her hair, but visible for a fleeting instant under the harsh afternoon sun. The car was gone in a breath, leaving only the whisper of expensive tires on pavement. But the image of the woman's face, of that fleeting, desperate glance, was seared into Grizz's mind. He was a Hell's Angel. He'd seen his share of darkness, of violence, of people trapped in situations they couldn't escape. You developed a sixth sense for it, an instinct that hummed like a badly tuned engine when something was fundamentally wrong. That night at the clubhouse, the air was thick with cigar smoke, the low growl of conversation, and the clink of beer bottles. The place was their sanctuary, a rough-hewn castle of loyalty built from leather and chrome. Grizz found their chapter president, Jax Reaper Corbin, sitting alone at a scarred wooden table in the corner, nursing a whiskey and staring at the club's charter hanging on the wall. Jax was a man forged from hard miles and harder choices. Tattoos snaked up his neck and across his knuckles, telling stories of loss and loyalty. He commanded respect, not through fear, but through an unwavering, almost terrifying sense of justice that was the bedrock of their brotherhood. Grizz pulled up a chair. "Saw something today, Reaper," he said, his voice a low rumble. He described the car, the speed, and the woman. He described her eyes. Looked like a spooked doe staring down a wolf. He finished, swirling the dregs of his beer. A few of the other brothers nearby grunted, dismissing it. Rich folks had their own problems, their own brand of drama. It wasn't their business. But Jax didn't dismiss it. He went very still, his gaze sharpening. The description of the woman's eyes, the hidden bruise, it was a key turning a lock on a door in his mind. He tried to keep bolted shut. "What kind of car?" Jax asked, his voice gravelly. "Late Model S-Class. Black. License plate was custom." "Kale," Grizz replied, proud of his memory for details. Jax's knuckles whitened around his glass. He knew the name. Donovan Kale. A real estate mogul who moved in circles far above their own. A man with a reputation for being untouchable, for crushing anything and anyone who got in his way. He was a different kind of predator from the street-level scum they usually dealt with, but a predator nonetheless. "A spooked doe," Jax repeated quietly, more to himself than to Grizz. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. He was no longer in the smoky clubhouse. He was years in the past, standing in a sterile hospital corridor, the antiseptic smell burning his nostrils, staring at his younger sister's face, her beautiful features marred by a similar shadow on her temple, her eyes holding that same shattered, haunted look. The memory was a ghost that rode on his shoulders every single day, a constant, agonizing reminder of a promise he had failed to keep. He looked at Grizz, his eyes burning with a cold fire that made the big man sit up straighter. "Find out where he lives. I want eyes on that house. Discreet. No contact. I just want to know what's going on in that castle on the hill." Grizz nodded, a slow, grim understanding passing between them. This wasn't just a whim. This was something more. The ghost of a long-dead promise had just been given a new purpose. The Reaper was about to go hunting. The ghost's name was Sarah. She was Jax's younger sister, all sunshine and reckless laughter, with a belief in the good of people that he had lost long ago on dusty roads and in bloody brawls. He was her leather-clad protector. She was his anchor to a world of innocence he fought to believe still existed. Then she'd met a man, a smooth-talking salesman who bought her flowers and whispered promises that dripped with poison. Jax had hated him on sight. He saw the flicker of control in the man's eyes, the way his hand lingered just a little too long on the small of her back, a gesture that looked like affection but was really a brand of ownership. Sarah had called him paranoid, overprotective. "You don't see the real him," she'd insisted. The flashback hit Jax, not as a gentle memory, but as a physical assault. He was back in his small apartment, the phone pressed hard against his ear, listening to Sarah's whispered, frantic call. She was crying, trying to choke back the sobs so her boyfriend in the next room wouldn't hear. She'd made excuses for a bruise on her arm a week earlier. "I'm so clumsy, Jax." I walked into a door, and he, desperate to believe her, had let it go. This time, her voice was stripped of all pretense. "He locked me in," she'd whispered, her terror a tangible thing that reached through the phone line and squeezed his heart. "He said if I ever try to leave, her voice broke. "I'm scared, Jax." He had told her to hang on, that he was coming. He'd thrown on his cut, his mind a red haze of fury, and ridden his Harley across town with a reckless abandon that bordered on suicidal. But he was too late. By the time he'd kicked the door off its hinges, the man was gone, and Sarah was lying on the floor, still and silent. The official report said she had fallen down the stairs. A tragique accident. Jax knew better. He saw the truth in the hand-shaped bruises on her arms, the terror that had been frozen in her eyes. The man had an alibi, friends who swore he was with them miles away. He walked free. Jax had never recovered from that failure. It became the defining tragedy of his life, the fuel for his rigid code. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. We are the monsters who hunt the real monsters. Now, Grizz's words had resurrected Sarah's ghost, and it was demanding a reckoning. He would not fail again. The reconnaissance mission began that night. Jax chose his team carefully, Grizz for his sharp eyes, and two younger prospects, Whisper and Rook, chosen for their ability to blend in and move silently. They didn't ride their bikes. That would be like announcing their presence with a roar of thunder. They took Grizz's nondescript work van, parking it on a wooded service road that offered a partial, but concealed, view of the Kale estate a half-mile away. Through high-powered binoculars, the house looked less like a home and more like a modern art museum. All sharp angles, cold glass, and sterile white stone. It was surrounded by a formidable wrought iron fence topped with cruel-looking spikes. Security cameras, sleek black eyes, swiveled on their mounts. Uniformed guards patrolled the perimeter with the disciplined boredom of soldiers in peacetime. For 2 days, they watched. They documented the patrol patterns, the timing of the gate opening for deliveries, the blind spots where the deep shadows of imported trees met the fence line. They saw Donovan Kale leave in the morning in his Mercedes and return in the evening, his movements precise and arrogant. They saw landscapers and pool cleaners and housekeepers, all of whom seemed to shrink in on themselves whenever the master of the house was present. But they saw no sign of Isla. "It's like she's a ghost," Whisper muttered on the second night, his eye pressed to the binoculars. "Maybe she left," Rook suggested. "A woman with eyes like that doesn't just leave," Jack said from the back of the van, his voice a low growl. "She's taken." He felt it in his bones, the same suffocating certainty he'd felt listening to Sarah's last phone call. This house wasn't a home, it was a prison. And then, on the third night, they saw her. A light flicked on in an upstairs window, one of the few that faced their direction. A silhouette appeared, slender and frail. It was her. She stood there for a long moment, a lonely figure framed in the golden rectangle of light, before the light was abruptly extinguished. It was enough. The ghost was real. The prisoner was there. Jax's hand clenched into a fist. The stakeout was no longer about confirming a suspicion. It was now about planning a jailbreak. The final straw for Isla wasn't a slap or a shove. It was the quiet, deliberate destruction of the last piece of her old life. It was a small, silver locket, tarnished with age, that had belonged to her mother. It contained a faded, postage stamp-sized photo of her parents on their wedding day. She kept it hidden in a box of old letters, a secret sanctuary of memory that Donovan had, until now, never discovered. He found it during one of his inspections, a methodical search of her belongings he conducted whenever he felt his control might be slipping. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. That would have been easier to bear. Instead, he brought the locket to her, holding it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of filth. "What is this?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "It was my mother's," she whispered, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. He smiled, a chilling, razor-thin line. "She's gone, Isla. That life is gone. There is only this life. Only me," with a sickening crunch. He crushed the delicate silver in his fist. He then opened his hand and let the mangled pieces fall to the pristine white carpet like dead leaves. "Now, there are no more distractions," he said, and walked away. Something inside Isla snapped. It wasn't loud. It was a silent, seismic shift. The fear was still there, a cold, coiling snake in her stomach, but it was now joined by a white-hot, diamond-hard rage. He had not just broken a piece of jewelry. He had tried to erase her very soul. That night, she decided she would rather die trying to escape than live another day as his ghost. The plan was born of desperation and a half-remembered plot from an old war movie. A signal. She couldn't use a phone. He had software that mirrored everything she did. She couldn't write a note. The staff would report it instantly. But she had a window, and she had the night. In the bedside table on Donovan's side of the bed, nestled next to a handgun he kept for protection, was a high-powered tactical flashlight. He'd bragged about its beam being visible for miles. A powerful storm was rolling in, the kind that made the lights flicker and sent the guards scurrying for cover. The wind howled against the glass, a symphony for her rebellion. As Donovan slept, his breathing a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the raging storm outside, Isla slipped out of bed. Her movements were fluid, silent, practiced from years of navigating her own home like a trespasser. She retrieved the flashlight, its cold, metallic weight a comfort in her trembling hand. She crept to the guest bedroom at the far end of the hall, the one with the window that faced the dark, unkempt woods at the edge of the property, away from the manicured lawns and patrolling guards. The storm was at its peak. Rain lashed against the pane, and a brilliant fork of lightning illuminated the grounds, momentarily overriding the security lights. It was now or never. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She remembered the code from the movie. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. S.O.S. It felt absurd, a child's game against a monster's fortress. It was all she had. Raising the flashlight, she pointed it into the black, rain-swept maw of the woods. Her thumb found the switch. Click, click, click. She paused, her breath held tight in her chest. Click, click, click. Another pause, longer this time, her arm aching. Click, click, click. She repeated the sequence again and again, a desperate, silent scream into the void, a prayer made of light, hoping, praying that someone, anyone, was out there in the darkness watching. In the cramped confines of the surveillance van, the night had devolved into a miserable, rain-soaked waiting game. The windows were fogged, and the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof was hypnotic. Rook was dozing in the passenger seat. Grizz was staring into the darkness, his patience as vast and steady as his frame. It was Whisper, the former Army signalman with the keenest eyes, who saw it first. "Hey," he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the drumming rain. "You guys see that?" He was pointing toward the Kale estate. Through a gap in the trees, a pinprick of light had appeared in an upper window. It flashed, then vanished. Probably just lightning reflecting off the glass. Rook mumbled, half asleep. The light flashed again. 3 quick pulses. "No," Whisper said, his voice tight with sudden intensity. He grabbed the high-powered binoculars, wiping the condensation from the lens with his sleeve. "That's not lightning." The light pulsed again, 3 longer, sustained beams, followed by 3 more short flashes. Whisper lowered the binoculars, his face pale in the faint glow of the van's dashboard. He looked at Grizz, his eyes wide. "That's a signal," he breathed. "That's S.O.S." The sleepy atmosphere in the van evaporated, replaced by a crackling, high-voltage tension. Grizz was on the radio in an instant, his voice a low, urgent growl. "Reaper, it's Grizz. We have it. We have confirmation. She's signaling us." The voice that came back over the radio was calm, but it held the deadly stillness of a coiled snake. "Understood. Pull back. Come home." The ride back to the clubhouse was silent, the weight of what they had just witnessed settling over them. The ghost in the window wasn't just a prisoner. She was a fighter. She was calling for help. When they arrived, the clubhouse was already stirring. Word had spread like wildfire. Jax was standing in the center of the main room, Under the stark glare of a bare bulb, a map of the Kale estate spread out on the table before him. He looked up as they entered, his eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to suck the air from the room. He didn't need to ask for details. He saw the truth on their faces. He slammed his palm down on the map. Call every patched member from here to the state line. He commanded the sergeant-at-arms. Tell them the Reaper is calling in his marker. Tell them we ride tonight. The room fell silent for a heartbeat, every eye on Jack's. He swept his gaze across the faces of his men, the hardened, the weary, the loyal. His voice dropped, becoming raw and intensely personal, filled with the ghosts of his past. For years, we've said we stand for something more than just ourselves. We've said we protect the ones the world forgets. Tonight, we prove it. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. There is a woman in that house who is living a hell none of us can imagine. She's found the courage to ask for help. We will be the answer to that call. We ride for her. We ride for those who can't ride for themselves. This is who we are. A low murmur started, growing in volume until it became a unified, thunderous roar of assent. It was the sound of 75 engines firing at once, the sound of a promise being made, the sound of a storm of righteous fury about to be unleashed. The planning session was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The large table in the center of the clubhouse, usually home to beer bottles and arm wrestling contests, was now a war room. Jack stood at its head, a grim architect of the coming storm. At his side were Grizz, whose intimate knowledge of the local roads was invaluable, and the club's sergeant-at-arms, a quiet, methodical man known only as Breaker, a former demolitions expert whose nickname came from his ability to breach any obstacle, physical or otherwise. Using satellite images and the detailed notes from the stakeout, they mapped every inch of the Kale estate. Breaker pointed out the vulnerabilities with a grease-stained finger. The main gate is a death trap, he stated, his voice flat and professional. Steel reinforced, magnetic locks, and a direct line of sight from the guardhouse. But the rear wall here, he tapped a section bordering the woods, is ornamental. Wrought iron, set in a stone base. The sensors are thermal, but this storm will play hell with them. We can cut through it in under 30 seconds with a hydraulic spreader. A new piece of intel complicated their plans. One of the prospects, who worked as a valet at a high-end downtown restaurant, had overheard two of Donovan Kale's known associates talking. Kale was hosting a private meeting at his estate that night. These weren't legitimate businessmen. They were enforcers for a rival criminal syndicate, men known for being armed and volatile. So we're not just walking into a house with private security, Jack summarized, his jaw tight. We're walking into a snake pit. This changed the calculus. A simple smash and grab was no longer an option. They needed precision, speed, and overwhelming force. The plan evolved into a two-pronged assault, a symphony of violence and deception. Phase 1, the diversion, Jax announced, his voice commanding the absolute attention of every man in the room. Grizz, you take 20 men. Ride up to the main gate. Loud and obnoxious. Make a scene. Set off some M80s. Make it look like some drunk bikers are trying to crash the rich guy's party. I want every guard on the property drawn to that gate. I want them to think the whole damn world is coming at them from the front. Grizz grinned, a fearsome sight. Loud and obnoxious? I was born for this part. Prez, Phase 2. The infiltration, Jax continued, his finger tracing a path on the map from the woods to the back of the house. Breaker, you're with me. The other 54 of us will go through the rear wall of the second. Grizz starts his party. We move in 3 teams. Team Alpha, you secure the grounds. Silent takedowns. No alarms. Team Bravo, you're on the guests. Neutralize Kale's business partners. We don't want any crossfire. My team, Team Charlie, we go for the house. We get the woman, and we get out. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over his brothers. Our objective is the woman. Her safety is paramount. We are ghosts. We enter, we retrieve the package, and we vanish. The local police will get an anonymous tip about an illegal gathering and weapons at the house, but only after we are long gone. Let the trash take itself out. The men nodded, their faces set like stone. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and had 1,000 points of failure. But in the quiet determination in their eyes, there was no doubt. They would not fail. The time had come. The low, guttural rumble started with a single bike, then another, and another, until the air for a mile around the clubhouse vibrated with the collective roar of 75 V-twin engines. It was a promise, a threat, a declaration of war. Chrome gleamed under the intermittent flashes of lightning as the legion of leather and steel assembled. They were a river of black, a moving wall of righteous fury, each man a cog in a machine built for one purpose. Jax swung his leg over his own bike, the custom Harley that was as much a part of him as his own skin. He settled into the saddle, the familiar feel of the worn leather a comfort. He pulled on his gloves, the methodical movements calming the storm inside him. Sarah's face swam in his vision, her eyes pleading. "Not this time, sis," he whispered into the wind. "This time, I'm not too late." Inside the sterile mansion, the storm outside was a pale imitation of the one brewing within. Donovan was agitated, pacing his study like a caged tiger. His guests were arriving soon, and any disruption to his perfectly controlled world was an intolerable offense. He barked at the staff, his temper a live wire. Isla felt the electricity in the air, the prelude to violence. She had no idea if her signal had been seen. The hope that had flared so brightly was now a guttering candle flame, threatened by the winds of her suffocating reality. She had armed herself with the only thing she could find, a slender, sharp-bladed letter opener from Donovan's desk. She had it tucked into the sleeve of her dress, its cold, hard edge a secret promise to herself that she would not be taken without a fight. The first distant rumble reached her ears. It was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the howl of the wind. She dismissed it as thunder, but then it grew a steady, rhythmic, ground-shaking roar that was not of the heavens. It was mechanical, powerful, and it was getting closer. Donovan stopped his pacing, a frown creasing his handsome face. He walked to the window, peering out into the rain-slicked darkness. What in God's name is that? The sound grew into a crescendo, the unmistakable thunder of dozens of motorcycles. It wasn't the sound of a passing group. It was the sound of an army arriving at the gates. Jax raised his gloved hand, and the river of chrome and steel came to a halt in the woods a quarter-mile from the estate's perimeter. The engines were cut, plunging the night into a sudden, shocking silence, broken only by the wind and the rain. He looked over at Grizz, who sat astride his bike at the head of the diversion team. A simple nod was exchanged, an entire conversation of trust and brotherhood passing in that one silent gesture. Grizz and his 20 men peeled off, their engines roaring back to life as they took the main road toward the front gate. Jax and the rest of the men dismounted, moving with a silent, disciplined urgency through the trees toward the rear of the property. The weight of their mission settled on them. They were the cavalry, the last hope for a woman they had never met. Jax felt the ghost of his sister settle on his shoulder, her presence not a burden, but a guide. The night was about to explode. The first sound was a series of sharp, percussive cracks like gunfire, followed by the roar of 20 Harley engines revving in unison. Grizz's diversion had begun. At the front gate, chaos erupted. The bikers circled like chrome-plated sharks, their headlights cutting erratic patterns through the rain. They hurled insults and empty bottles at the ornate gate, while the M80s they'd lit and tossed into the bushes exploded with concussive force, mimicking the sound of a firefight. Inside the main guardhouse, panic set in. The head of security barked into his radio. "All units to the front gate. We have a breach attempt. Hostile actors, possibly armed." Guards from every corner of the sprawling estate began running and driving toward the front, their attention completely fixed on the loud, obnoxious, and utterly fake threat. Donovan watched from his study window, his face a mask of contemptuous fury. "Drunken animals," he spat to his 2 guests, who had just arrived. "My security will have them cleared out in minutes." Pathetic, the dramatic irony of his statement hung thick and heavy in the opulent air. While every eye was on the front, Jax's 55-man force reached the rear fence. Breaker produced a portable hydraulic spreader, its jaws looking like some prehistoric predators. With a low, powerful hum, the jaws clamped onto the wrought iron bars. The metal groaned, screeched, and then surrendered with a loud snap, creating a gap wide enough for two men to pass through at once. "Go," Jax commanded, his voice a low hiss. The Hell's Angels flowed through the breach like a black tide, melting into the shadows of the meticulously landscaped gardens. They moved with the terrifying grace of predators, splitting into their designated teams. Team Alpha, armed with tasers and zip ties, fanned out across the grounds. They encountered 3 guards rushing toward the front gate, their backs to the real threat. The takedowns were swift, silent, and brutally efficient. The guards were neutralized and silenced before they even knew they were under attack. Team Bravo, led by Breaker, moved toward the guest wing where Kale was meeting his associates. They breached a side door, flowing into the corridor like wraiths. Jax led Team Charlie directly toward the back of the main house, his eyes fixed on the large glass patio doors of the living room. They were his entry point. Inside, Isla heard the commotion from the front of the property. She saw Donovan's smug dismissal of the threat, but she also felt a vibration through the soles of her feet, a subtle tremor that didn't match the chaos outside. It was closer. Her hand tightened on the letter opener hidden in her sleeve. Donovan, eager to project an aura of complete control to his criminal partners, decided to pour them all a celebratory drink. "A toast," he announced with a sneer, "to keeping the trash where it belongs." He turned his back on Isla and walked toward the wet bar in his study, leaving her alone in the vast living room for a precious few seconds. That's when the world shattered. The patio door didn't just open. It imploded, a shower of tempered glass cascading inward. 3 massive figures, clad in black leather and armed with a terrifying sense of purpose, stepped through the frame. The man in the lead was Jax. He was bigger, more imposing than she could have imagined. His face was a hard mask of controlled fury, but his eyes, when they found hers across the room, were not cold. They held a flicker of something else: recognition, understanding, and a solemn promise. Isla was frozen, caught between the monster she knew and the terrifying saviors she had only dreamed of. Jax took a step toward her, ignoring the broken glass crunching under his boots. He didn't speak. He simply held out a gloved hand, an invitation to a world she had forgotten existed. The sound of a glass dropping and shattering in the next room signaled Donovan's return. He appeared in the doorway of his study, his face contorting from arrogant amusement to pure, undiluted rage. "What is the meaning of this? Get out of my house," he roared, his voice shaking with fury. His eyes darted from the bikers to Isla, and a venomous understanding dawned. "You," he hissed at her. "You did this." His hand disappeared inside his suit jacket and emerged with a sleek, silver handgun. In a single fluid motion, he lunged for Isla, yanking her back against him, the cold muzzle of the gun pressed hard against her temple. "She's mine," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation, his arm a steel band around her throat. "One more step, and I swear to God, I will blow her head off." The room fell into a terrifying, split-second silence. Isla could smell the expensive cologne on Donovan, feel his panicked, ragged breaths against her hair. The cold metal of the gun was an icy promise of death. But looking past him, she saw Jax. He hadn't moved. He hadn't flinched. The fury on his face had been replaced by a chilling, absolute calm. The ghost of his sister was standing right beside him now, her silent scream his battle cry. "Let her go, Kale," Jax said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was more menacing than any shout. He took a half-step forward, deliberately drawing Donovan's attention. "Your business is with me." He was baiting him, using his own voice as a weapon, while his men, silent as shadows, began to flank him from the periphery. Breaker and another biker appeared in the hallway entrance behind Donovan. A pincer movement he was too enraged to notice. "I built this," Donovan shrieked, his composure shattering completely. "She belongs to me. You will not take anything from me." It was the desperate cry of a tyrant whose world was crumbling. He was so focused on Jax, on the primary threat in front of him, that he didn't see Breaker move. In the split second that Donovan's eyes flickered toward the new movement in the hallway, Jax exploded into action. He didn't charge in a straight line. He lunged low and fast, like a panther. He hit Donovan at the knees, a brutal, perfectly executed tackle that sent both of them crashing to the floor. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the high ceiling. Isla was thrown clear, scrambling away on her hands and knees as the fight devolved into a primal struggle. Jax was a force of nature. He drove his fist into Donovan's face, once, twice, the sound a sickening crack of bone and cartilage. Donovan's arrogance shattered along with his nose. The fight was over before it truly began. Jax wrenched the gun from his limp hand and tossed it aside. Breaker and his man were on Donovan in an instant, hauling him to his feet and slamming him against a wall, his expensive suit now torn and blood-spattered. Jax rose slowly, his chest heaving. He stood over the pathetic, whimpering form of Donovan Cale, no longer a titan of industry, just a broken, bleeding man. "You will never touch her again," Jax growled, his voice thick with the venom of a promise fulfilled. "You will never touch anyone again." He resisted the primal urge to finish it, to deliver the justice he had been denied for his sister. Instead, he gave a sharp nod to Breaker. They left Donovan zip-tied and bleeding for the police to find, his empire and his arrogance crushed under the weight of a leather boot. Jax turned to Isla, his expression softening as he took in her trembling form. He walked over and gently helped her to her feet, his touch surprisingly steady. "It's over," he said softly. "We're getting you out of here." As he led her out through the shattered patio door, the distant wail of sirens began to cut through the night, the sound not of a threat, but of a new beginning. The retreat was as disciplined and swift as the assault. As sirens grew closer, the Hell's Angels melted back into the woods, leaving behind a scene of controlled chaos for the authorities to unravel. Donovan Cale and his criminal associates were found amidst the wreckage of his perfect home, their illegal weapons and incriminating documents conveniently laid out for easy discovery. The anonymous tip had painted a picture of a criminal meeting gone wrong, a story the police were more than happy to accept. No one mentioned a ghost army of bikers. Isla was wrapped in a thick leather jacket that smelled of rain, engine oil, and safety. She was placed on the back of Jax's bike, her arms tentatively circling his waist. When the 75 engines roared to life in the sanctuary of the woods, the sound that had once terrified her now felt like a promise. It was the sound of her freedom. They didn't take her to a hospital or a police station. They took her to a place she could never be found, a remote, rustic cabin deep in the mountains, owned by the club for decades. It was a safe house, a place for brothers to heal or hide, and now it was her sanctuary. The first few days were a blur of sleep and silence. She was housed in a small, clean room with a handmade quilt on the bed. She flinched at every loud noise, every unexpected shadow. The bikers, these huge, intimidating men, treated her with a gentleness that was utterly disarming. They moved quietly, spoke in low tones around her. Grizz would leave trays of hot food outside her door, knocking softly before walking away, so she wouldn't be startled. The wife of one of the bikers, a warm, no-nonsense woman named Rosa, brought her a bag of clean, soft clothes and sat with her for an hour without saying a word, just offering a comforting presence. Jax was a constant, silent guardian. He would spend hours on the cabin's front porch, just sitting in a rocking chair, cleaning his bike parts or simply watching the forest, his presence a formidable wall between her and the world she had escaped. He never pushed her to talk. One evening, as the sun set, painting the mountain peaks in hues of orange and purple, he finally spoke. He told her about Sarah. He didn't share graphic details, but he spoke of his guilt, his failure, and the vow he had made on her grave. "When Grizz told me about you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I saw my sister's eyes. I couldn't be too late again. In that shared moment of pain and loss, a profound bond was forged. Isla, for the first time in years, felt safe enough to cry. She wept for the woman she had been, for the years she had lost, and for the sister he could not save. Over the next few weeks, the news was filled with the spectacular downfall of Donovan Cale. The evidence found at his home had unraveled a vast criminal enterprise of money laundering, extortion, and bribery. His empire crumbled to dust, his name becoming a byword for disgrace. He would spend the rest of his life in a cage far more real than the one he had built for her. Isla slowly began to heal. The silence that had been born of fear was gradually replaced by a quiet confidence. She started joining the others on the porch, listening to their stories, even offering a small smile at Grizz's terrible jokes. The roar of a Harley no longer made her jump. It made her look to the road, a feeling of family stirring in her chest. One afternoon, Jax found her staring out at the open road that wound its way down the mountain. "You're free to go, he said gently. "We can get you set up anywhere you want." A new life, she turned to him, and for the first time, he saw not a victim, but a survivor. Her eyes were clear and strong. She was wearing a pair of borrowed jeans and one of Grizz's old flannels, but she wore them like armor. "What if I don't want to run anymore?" she asked, her voice steady. "What if I want to stay and fight?" The final scene unfolded months later. Isla stood beside Jax, watching the sunset from the clubhouse porch. She wore her own leather jacket now, a gift from the club, its back still bare, but its weight on her shoulders a comfort. She was helping Rosa manage the club's unofficial network, a lifeline for other men and women trapped in situations like hers, using her experience to guide others to safety. She had found a new family in the most unlikely of places, a brotherhood of outlaws who lived by a code of honor the civilized world had forgotten. The sound of a bike roaring to life echoed in the evening air, a sound of defiance, of loyalty, of unwavering hope. For anyone out there living in the shadows, trapped by a monster who whispers that no one will ever come for you, remember this story. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather and ride on wings of chrome. Their roaring engines a promise that even in the darkest night, you are never, ever alone. Share this story if you believe in the power of true brotherhood, and comment with your thoughts on these unlikely heroes who prove that sometimes it takes an outlaw to deliver true justice.